In this day and age, we are constantly surrounded by technology. It is everywhere, and most people use it every day.
Even right now, as you watch this video, you are utilizing technology. You are watching it on a computer, and it itself was made on a computer, a piece of technology that has evolved a lot in the past 75 years.
Even though the computer is one of the most recognized objects in the world, almost no one can recognize its creator.
The man we speak of is John V. Atanasoff, creator of the Atanasoff Barrett computer, or the ABC for short. And he has one of the most important, but sadly one of the most forgotten legacies of all time.
John Atanasoff Sr., John Vincent's father, was born in Bulgaria and arrived with his uncle at Ellis Island when he was just 1 year old in 1889. John Sr. grew up in America, went to college, got his physiology and electrical engineering degree, and eventually married Iva Lucy Purdy. They had several children named Elithan, Margaret, Theodore, Avis, Raymond, Melvin, Ivan, and the one we spent a lot of time getting to know, John Vincent Atanasoff. John Vincent Atanasoff was born on October 4th, 1903, just a few miles west of Hamilton, New York. And shortly afterwards, his family moved to Austin, Florida, for his father's job. He then later moved to the small town of Brewster, Florida, where he finished elementary school. Growing up, John was very interested in math and electrical engineering. This passion was only fueled by his mom, who guided him to read advanced math books from the age of 9 and introduced him to the number systems besides base 10. His love for mathematics, and possibly the invention of the ABC itself, came from a simple gift from his father, a slide rule that, with his superior knowledge, led him to complete high school in just 2 years at the age of 15. In 1925, John Vincent Atanasoff boarded a train to Iowa State College because it is the first school that asked him to apply. From September to November, John spent most of his time working on achieving his master's degree while still teaching 2 undergraduate mathematics classes. He received his master's degree in 1926, and a few days later he married his sweetheart, Laura Meeks. They had their first child, Elsie. He later went on to receive his doctoral degree at the University of Wisconsin with his thesis, The Dialect Constant of Helium. While working on his thesis, he had to deal with complex equations, and the only tool he could use to work them out was a buggy Monroe analog calculator, but nevertheless, he finished his thesis and returned home to Iowa State looking for work.
John's first job started out with him working as an assistant professor of mathematics and physics, but he was quickly promoted to associate professor. With promotion, his lab moved from Beer Chair Hall to the Physics Hall, which was where the ABC was eventually created. Even with the promotion, he still had to work with complex equations on a frustrating analog calculator, and began to question their reliability. He even created his own calculator in 1963 with the physicist Glenn Murphy called the Laplaxometer, but said it had the same flaws as other calculators. He began to study more effective ways to compute and solve problems, and became obsessed with the idea of finding the solution. One day in the winter of 1937, he was so angry that, well, maybe I'll just let him tell you himself.
And I came up to one day in the fall of 1937 when I went out to my office to work in the evening, and I realized I'd made no progress and that things were really in a bad way. Finally, I was so unhappy that I saw I couldn't get anything done, and I did something that I did in those days. I got in my car and drove for a long period of time at a high rate of speed so that I would give my attention to driving and not to my problems. After driving for perhaps 3 or 4 hours, I became aware of the surroundings, and I was crossing the Mississippi River. I decided that I better slow down and see where I was going. I looked ahead and there was a light, and I soon realized that was a tavern. I went in there, hung up the overcoat, bought myself a drink, and sat down. In the cool atmosphere of the roadhouse, I now reached the following conclusions on my computing machine. I would use separate memory and computing structures. This is going to be a large machine, and we would isolate these two elements. In ordinary computing machines, they're usually rather interrelated. I was going to use the binary number system. The whole structure would be substantially electronic, and we would have electronic logic circuits. We would use a sequential system. Instead of powers of 10, we have powers of 2, and the lower powers of 2 would be computed first.
After making the sketch on the bar napkin, he started writing up a funding request to Iowa State College for the ABC. In 1939, John received a $650 grant from the Iowa State College, which would be about $11,000 today. He started working with graduate electrical engineering student Clifford Berry on the ABC computer. John's new computer would combine his entire life of study into one very important piece of innovation called the ABC computer. It was the first electronic digital computer, and it was about the size of a desk. The ABC had 30 vacuum tube assemblies, each of which handled just one number in the equation. They all operated at the same time for maximum speed. The ABC could hold up to 2 equations at once, one on each memory drum. They could hold 30 55-bit numbers, or 1650 bits per drum, for a total of 3,300 bits. That's about as much as 3 kilobytes, in today's world, enough to store a single image file. Once the punch cards were inserted into the computer, the equation was converted into binary and solved systematically, computing lower powers of 2 first and then higher powers. The ABC draws less than 1,000 watts, which is less than your typical hairdryer. Modern computers are over 1 trillion times faster, but the principles are the same. Even though it seems to be very underwhelming, the ABC computer was revolutionary and changed the way we compute and solve problems today. Without the ABC computer, we would have gotten iPods and smartphones and other computers at some point maybe, but it would be a long time coming. It was the grandfather of all other computers.
In 1942, John Vincent Atanasoff and Clifford Berry left Ames. John left for a defense position at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in Washington, D.C. Clifford left for a defense-related job in California. John assumed he would spend a couple of months to a few years at most with the government. His wife and 3 children would remain in Ames, and he made regular trips to come and see them. Later on, John became chief scientist of the acoustics division at the Naval Ordnance Laboratory in Washington, D.C., a position he was very fond of. He was also earning a lot more than the $10,000 government salary cap that was in place at the time. He became involved in the first atomic tests in the Pacific, projects he enjoyed very much. His family had remained in Ames, and during one of his trips back in 1948, he discovered that, much to his displeasure, ISU had disassembled the ABC computer without letting him or Clifford Berry know. Sadly, the separation from his family was causing him and his wife, Laura, to drift apart. They divorced in 1949, and Laura got custody of the children and moved to Denver, Colorado. Later that year, he married Alice Crosby, an Iowa native who had gone to D.C. during the war. He eventually retired in 1961 at the age of 58.
Some of you are probably wondering why you've never really heard much about John, after the mysterious suicide of Clifford Berry, which Atanasoff suggested was possible foul play. Atanasoff got wrapped up in the Honeywell vs. Berry Rand, which challenged the ENAC, its ideas, and its creators John Malarkey and Presper ENIAC authenticity. The majority of the controversy was that ENAC was the first general-use computer, and the ABC was a specific-use computer, and that they all came up with the idea on their own. Sometime after the ABC was finished, John Malarkey came to Iowa State College and stayed with Atanasoff. Dr. Malarkey stated under oath he spent no more than 1.5 hours in the presence of the computer. Under cross-examination, this statement changed. He said that he had spent 5 days with Atanasoff. He got a detailed explanation of how the machine worked. He always had access to the 35-page manuscript, and at one point he even helped Clifford move the machine to a new spot. He also spent a lot of time in John's study, possibly copying notes. He blamed all of this on faulty memory. Because of all the evidence stacked against him, Judge Earl R. Larson ruled that Dr. Malarkey deprived important concepts from the ABC and that the ENIAC was not the first digital computer. Unfortunately, the Watergate scandal occurred at around the same time of the trial, covering up the recognition that Atanasoff deserved. Thankfully, through the trial ended, Atanasoff was able to move on with his life.
John was accepted into the Bulgarian Academy for Science and was given a First Merit Award and a public recognition. 3 years later, he was recognized in the United States, in which 1990 George Bush presented a high award for science and technology to him, and then formally recognized him as the true father of the computer in front of the whole country. Also, the book Atanasoff, the Forgotten Father of the Computer by Clark R. Mollenhoff was written about him, and Iowa State made a documentary in his honor. Unfortunately, not but 5 years later, on June 15, 1995, he suffered a fatal stroke and passed away at the age of 91. Even though he's gone, John's influence on technology can still be seen today. Your computer, your phone, and even the calculator you used to do your math homework all came from concepts taken from the ABC. JVA has one of the biggest influences in the world of technology today, and it affects every item out there. John Vincent Atanasoff created the first digital computer at Iowa State College in the early 1940s to solve its complicated mathematical problems. His leadership in the invention and innovation of computer electronics left a lasting legacy that still influences the technological world today. Unfortunately, he has faded out of common knowledge and is not always recognized for his achievement. He is truly the forgotten leader in the world of technology.